Check it out. Google.
And they don't really explain it, but maybe that was from them actually using the Netgear switch. In which case, that would mean they configured the router properly.
That was
Linus
all me.
Tech trips.
What do you think he changed? Can you hear anything from him? Speed test is good. Okay, let's pretend like it's not working. It's still not working.
Okay.
Just kidding, it works.
All I did was unplug it and replug it. That's weird.
Oh,
So,
God.
what?
So all he did was unplug it and replug it back in. That's what sucks is that fixes 99% of your issues. If it's not the cable or user error, it is a reboot, basically, that fixes anything in communications or technology in general, it seems. But I do kind of wonder what he did in there. I'm guessing they swapped over to the Netgear and maybe that made it work.
Would not work right now.
Well, Wi-Fi doesn't work.
What else does not work?
Guest Wi-Fi?
I mean, guest Wi-Fi should work.
So here's a question for you guys. Do you want to go for like another 2 hours and possibly be done?
So typically, they're talking about their Wi-Fi and their guest Wi-Fi not working. I assume that those were on their own VLANs. If I was designing the network, I would most certainly have the guest Wi-Fi as its own VLAN. Regular Wi-Fi would be its own VLAN. Servers, phones, and a certain amount of desktops, depending on their location, would all be in different VLANs. So while I guess they have internet access, maybe they're still running on a single VLAN and it just so happens that the configuration matches up for that one to be the one with internet access. But it seems like they probably still have an issue somewhere relating to VLANs since their Wi-Fi networks are down as well.
Okay, so stuff to do.
What's not working? Do we know Wi-Fi is working?
No idea.
So this
Guest
is good.
Wi-Fi.
Yes, Wi-Fi.
So Wi-Fi and guest
Fix
Wi-Fi aren't
VLANs.
working. They're making a
Set
list
up
of everything they need to
monitoring
fix,
for
basically.
network devices and servers. Right, isn't this episode brought to you by Pulseway?
So just kind of by listening to everything they're listing off that doesn't work, Wi-Fi, guest Wi-Fi, management for servers, to me, it would seem like if all of that is not functional, but their desktop PCs and the internet is, my mind directly goes to VLANs being misconfigured, because if they didn't throw their old switch back in there and there really is no VLAN configuration, basically only one section of the network is going to be functional. And just judging by the way things are going, they probably weaseled their way into basically a flat network, which means that everything in there is going to be on the same subnet. And if that was the case, all of these other separate networks that would have been completely isolated before, they're all going to retain their old configurations and they're not going to be able to work on this new subnet, basically.
Here's the thing. I've plugged in all the Ethernet cables from the patch panel, so these are all the ones where like I know what they are. But a lot of this stuff that's just hanging into the room is not labeled.
Well, yeah, it's pretty obvious that labeling isn't really done very well, but this kind of brings up another common thing when you're working in a communications closet, especially at one that's pretty old and after a lot of people. Usually these closets get pretty messy, especially with cabling, because the initial install will go in, it'll be pretty, and then things will go down, you'll replace equipment, you'll swap hardware, you'll run in new lines, you'll get rid of old lines, and not everybody who works on it will actually get rid of what is unused anymore. So you'll walk into a communications closet and you'll probably find just bundles of cable just cut, still in the rack. And it's basically just because whoever was in front of you doing work before, they didn't want to remove all that stuff. Either they didn't have enough time or they were too lazy. That's how you end up with situations like this, where you've got just a whole rat's nest of cabling that you have no idea what it goes to, if it's useful or if it's not. So really, moral of the story is, when you're actually doing a job, see it to completion, and if you do have to remove things or deactivate connections, at least remove them. Do the guy ahead of you a favor and clean up after yourself when you're doing maintenance, or else you're gonna just cause an ass pain for whoever's after you.
So connected to the guest Wi-Fi,
Yeah.
we've got no IP, no internet, no nothing. So right now it's not working.
Let's see if we can figure out the easier way to do guest Wi-Fi.
So I don't really understand that statement, the easier way to do guest Wi-Fi. So like I said, I'm not trying to rag on Linus or anything here, but that's almost a textbook manager statement. So kind of you get the task, oh, guest Wi-Fi is not working. All right, well, we're looking into it. We're not getting an IP. The configuration doesn't seem to be working. So yeah, it's there's an outage and we're going to be trying to fix it. And then your manager says, well, why don't you just figure out the easier way to do it? if somebody said that to me, I'd look at them funny, because I mean, guest Wi-Fi is usually configured in a certain way. If there's an easier way to do it, it's probably using a different platform. So unless they want to swap out the entire method and configuration and probably even hardware that they're using for guest Wi-Fi to begin with, there really is no easier way. The easy way to do guest Wi-Fi is to configure it properly for what you already have. So that statement is just really funny because it just kind of implies, well, get it done. Don't really know what you're doing, but maybe do it the easier way. I don't know. That's just funny to me.
Change all default passwords. I don't know what passwords need to be changed. I don't know any of these.
So, I mean, that's definitely a good thing, is to change all your default passwords, but that should be a part of regular maintenance, not part of an outage window. I mean, it's good that they're taking the time to actually do that, but it seems like this isn't really the best time to be updating your passwords. That's kind of just a security ongoing maintenance thing. I mean, at least really this downtime isn't hurting anything except possibly their video upload schedule, because they have something they need to get out there. But if this was a real world situation where you've busted your outage window that you've allotted yourself and there's actually some production downtime, you're not going to be using any resources really to change default passwords.
You disconnected the Wi-Fi?
Like the whole, like now?
Yeah, like I don't have access to the network, let alone the internet.
Like, and it just went down now?
Like around the time you got this back up.
What the hell? Here, I'll plug it into 21.
Just in case you wanted all your packages to be out of date, hit up CentOS.
It's kind of funny that they say that, but CentOS, the reason that all the packages are out of date is because it's typically a stable platform. They don't push regular, frequent updates because they, at least from what I hear and what I've read, they intentionally lag behind to test all of the bugs and all of the updates, and they want to make sure that when they do push an update, it doesn't break everything. So CentOS is stable and reliable because it is perpetually out of date, basically.
I need to get access to that Netgear switch.
It's not coming up?
I removed the VLANs.
Oh.
That shouldn't have caused any problems, but it did.
Oh no, oh no. So he said he needs access to the Netgear switch, which was his the old switch that they had in there, which should have been configured properly, but he said he just wiped the VLANs off of it and it shouldn't have caused any issues. That is one of the cringiest statements in both of these videos, because yes, that absolutely 100% should have caused an issue. If there were VLANs configured on all this before, and that's how everything was set up, removing them just hosed the network. That's why at least understanding what it is you're working on is, and a little bit of how it functions, is pretty critical, because you don't want to be in the situation where you're just like, oh, well, it should work if I delete that, and what you delete actually ends up being a very critical part of how the network functions.
Because we factory reset the cloud key,
Uh-oh.
we no longer have ownership of the APs.
Oh no.
So we need to adopt them. Do you know the password for those?
No. As far as I know, we never had one. Let's just blow up everything.
At this point, you might as well. So what they did was they reset the cloud key, which what the cloud key is a piece of Ubiquiti hardware that runs the Unify controller software. So what Unify access points are is they're dumb access points. They don't actually have an operating system on them that you can just manage one by one. They're managed and configured through a controller, which is a piece of software. And the cloud key is just basically, it's like a Raspberry Pi that runs this controller software. A lot of people just don't even buy the one from Ubiquiti. They just buy a Raspberry Pi and put software on it. But basically, by factory resetting that, they wiped all the configuration, which the controller is the main hub for all of the access points. So by factory resetting that, they now have a brand new configuration, nothing from the old ones. And Unify access points are tied to a controller by what's called adoption. And once you tie an access point to the controller, it's basically tied to that instance of the controller. So by resetting the cloud key to factory defaults, they've basically made a new instance of a controller, and all of the access points are still holding on to their old configuration. And the only way to be able to change those is to readopt them to this new instance of the controller, which will wipe their configs. So at this point, unless they have a backup somewhere, they're going to have to just completely reconfigure their wireless networks and all of their access points through this controller. And I'm not 100% sure what he was asking Linus about with the passwords, but what it sounded like to me was he was wanting the passwords to the actual access points themselves, which really wouldn't give him anything because you can't manage the access points by logging into them directly. You have to manage them through the controller, which they just hosed. So what I'm kind of putting together in my head here is that the guest Wi-Fi wasn't working because he took the VLANs off the switch, so that network was isolated, or at least in the wrong flat network subnet from everything else. And because it couldn't access the internet, he decided to reset the cloud key to hopefully make it work. Because, I mean, you know, the number one thing you do when you're working with this stuff is turn it off, turn it back on again. But what you don't want to do is hold the reset button on something like that. And kind of a funny story, I actually had somebody do that to an edge router because I gave them that to use in their house. And typically with a home router, you would hold the reset key, set it to factory defaults, kind of clear all the configs out, because a home router will work like it should with default configs. That's really, they're designed to just work out of the box. But stuff like this business or low-end enterprise grade stuff, the configuration is the most valuable part of it, and by resetting it, wiping the configs makes it basically unusable. So while resetting stuff is good for typical home use, in the enterprise environment, the last thing you want to do is a reset. A reboot is fine, but a reset, no, not unless you know what you're doing or you intend to start over.
Well, I mean, we're doing it stupid, but like at the same time, there's nothing preventing anything from working at this point. Like, it's all just one big network. Nothing is segregated. Everything should be communicating, but it's not.
Okay. So he did remove the VLANs from most likely everything. So like he said, it's all one big network. It's all a flat network. So it's all one big subnet now since he removed all the VLANs. So I guess at this point he's actually kind of done some digging and seen what it was he did. He tore down the segregation, which was the VLANs. And he now knows that it's all one flat network. So technically, yeah, he's correct. There's nothing preventing it from working because it's all under one subnet. So since that subnet that they're on is working, and I assume they're able to access the internet on that subnet with the same flat network as everything else, there would be no reason for everything to still be not functioning, except for the fact that you're dealing with servers. So typically a server is going to have a static IP address, which, like we saw earlier, static IPs seem to be a little bit of a weak spot for them. They don't really know which ones have static and which ones don't, apparently. But I would put money that a lot of the equipment that they're working with is still configured for their old VLANs. And if you know what VLANs are and how they work, each VLAN is technically its own subnet. It has to be. So while you've got like one VLAN over here, 192.168.0. whatever, your other VLAN over in the next area would be 192.168.1. whatever. They are two completely separate networks, and there has to be routing between them. So if you just tear all of that down and throw it into one big glob, you're still going to have the configurations on your devices like servers or desktops or really anything that was statically set before still hanging out there with the wrong IPs. So if you have a 192.168.1 device trying to access its default gateway of say 1.1, but it's on the 0.1 network, nothing's going to respond to it because nothing is in its subnet except for those other devices that may still be holding on to that old configuration. So there's going to be no way out or no route out because everything is misconfigured. It's not in the same network that it was before. So I'm just going to assume that that's probably their issue, is that their subnets are just all kind of jacked up now because they removed the segregation.
I don't know what to tell you. That switch only has a single connection to the Dell switch. That's it.
What about to the Netgear?
It doesn't have a connection to the Netgear switch. Everything goes through the Dell.
Did we set the subnet on this properly? I don't think we did.
Oh man, there we go. Jake's following my thought process here. Did they do that?
Possible that we didn't.
I bet you that's what it is. That's if anything I've learned in the last 3 years, it's almost always user error.
So was it?
So kind of something that I've noticed so far is Jake seems to be like Yoda. He just comes in. First it was the static IP. Did you set the static IP correctly? Oh, that was the issue. Here he comes in, is the subnet right? Which, like the rant I just had 5 seconds ago, it probably isn't. That probably is the issue. And he's betting that that's the issue. And he also said that it's usually user error, which is 100% correct. Pretty much, if you've ever worked a help desk before and had to respond to user issues, you go out there and they'll tell you that, oh well, the internet's not working. Oh, I bet I think your proxy is messed up because I can't browse to Facebook. And then you go out on site and you figure out that they plugged in their Ethernet cable to a hairdryer for whatever reason. Like, it doesn't make sense. It's almost always user error. Most of the time these devices, they just run, they hum along, they do what they're supposed to do, and it's not until someone comes along and changes something or screws with it in some way that it actually doesn't work. Now, of course, I'm excluding hardware failure from that, but most of the time it's because some kind of outward force messed with your equipment.
Hell yeah, it's not set. Oh my god, if this works again. Dude, do you know how many points I am above you right now? Like, holy shit.
So
Even he realizes that he's fixing everything.
Yeah. So how many other devices on our network are going to be borked like that? Like, what about did we change the access points? Are all the switches updated with this new subnet?
Yes.
Are there any VMs that aren't updated?
Oh yeah, like all of them probably.
Well, yeah, so we should probably get on that.
Okay.
Well, other than this one. Okay, so what we have left to do, we gotta...
Alright, so it looks like he figured out the issue. It is the subnets, exactly like what I was saying. They're going to have to go into everything, all the VMs, change the subnet that they're on. Now, this kind of brings up a little bit scary of an issue, or an issue that's a little bit scary. I kind of worded that a little weird. But basically, they just tore down any security boundary that they would have had. So they've got their public internet connection there that they're about to upgrade to a 10 gigabit direct connection to a data center. And it's essentially just connecting into one big flat network. So their guest Wi-Fi, people that they don't know, are going to be connecting to that. Their regular Wi-Fi, everybody's personal phones are going to be connected to that. All of their servers that hold their production stuff or their security stuff or just anything at all, that's all on the same network. So little Jimmy from down the street could just walk by this place, connect to the guest Wi-Fi. I assume maybe they have a portal or something, but he could just get on there and just wreak havoc because there is no security boundary at this point. They're basically having to rely on host firewalls or something for any type of security. So this just by design is terrible. So I understand that they're just trying to get things to work at this point, and by putting it all into one subnet, they will achieve that, but that's just really the worst idea ever. They were segregated for a reason, and they need to remain segregated because you don't want regular at-home employee devices connecting to your production server farm. That is just mind-blowingly stupid, basically. So while the steps that they're taking are technically right in that they're going to get it to work, if I was there, yeah, I would put the red light up just immediately because what you are doing is potentially catastrophic.
Oh, did you just PoE your computer?
I think so.
That right there.
Okay, you know that's not like actually funny, right?
It's like kind of funny.
No, it's like
but-
actually not funny.
Alright, so that thing he's holding right there is a Unify Power over Ethernet brick. And what that does is it's got two RJ45 ports on it. One of it is labeled for LAN and the other one says PoE or Power over Ethernet. So basically you plug that thing into a wall socket and one of the ports is going to put voltage on the wire to power devices such as a wireless access point. So I know that Unify, most of theirs uses passive power over Ethernet, which basically just means the power is going to be there regardless of if something on the other end can accept it or not. And it depends on what model they have as to whether it's 24 volt or 48 volt passive. But I highly doubt that it's using a power over Ethernet standard like AF or AT. And basically one of the things you have to be careful with power over Ethernet is plugging it into something that can't accept it. Because if it's passive, it has no way to negotiate whether or not it's needed on the other end. So what he did was he plugged the power end into his laptop and possibly fried the network card in it, because a laptop's NIC is not designed to accept power. It's not supposed to be powered by the Ethernet cable, but he introduced power into it anyways. Now, a lot of modern stuff usually has some sort of circuit protection on there to just stop it from being completely fried because of voltage on the line, but not everything does that. Actually, a lot of stuff doesn't do that, so there is very high probability that you're going to fry something if you accidentally plug it into the powered port on that thing. So that's something you never want to do. One of those ports is not powered. That is what you would plug into your laptop. And the other one is, that's something you would plug into the wireless access point. Now, if they were using a standard power over Ethernet protocol, then it would try to negotiate whether or not the device needed power and how much power to send. But that's the difference between kind of the power over Ethernet protocol and just passive power. Passive power is like a wall socket. The actual protocols would be like if you plugged a TV in, your wall socket would send some information to see if the TV needed power and how much it needed, and then it would send the power. So very possible that he fried his card there, and Linus is pissed.
Can we plug
exactly.
a PoE
Right.
injector? Can we plug it into the switch, like in a non-PoE port, like in the Netgear switch or something?
Sure. Okay, so plugging into the camera directly.
Okay.
Okay, we're in.
So okay.
So now what?
Okay, so what I can do is make sure that it's on the right network. Then we can try plugging it back in and see if that works.
Fine. Hold on. Router gateway, that's not right.
Well, I mean, that's what the other ones were set to, too.
Okay, so move it over. So here's our ghetto solution to PoE inject, connect to the camera. Anyway, we shouldn't have to do that. It's plugged into a PoE switch.
Okay, so right there, I can guarantee you I know what issue they're having. So they're confused because they had the cameras plugged into a switch that supports PoE, but yet when they swapped it over to this injector wall wart, it worked. Now I can tell you that the reason for that is because that switch they have in there is probably capable of standard protocol PoE or like dynamic PoE, the actual AT or AF standard. And these Unify access points with that wall wart is almost certainly either 24 volt or 48 volt passive PoE. Now, typical network equipment, especially the high-end enterprise stuff like that Dell, are not going to be capable of producing passive PoE, because passive PoE is technically just a low standard. It's dumb. It's not really used in high-end gear. So the PoE from the switch isn't going to work for those cameras or the access points, because the cameras and the access points aren't going to try to negotiate anything. They're just going to expect passive power to be made, but the switch that they have in there is going to try to negotiate something, and it's going to be unsuccessful. So no power is going to be put on that line because it can't negotiate it, which is a safety feature. It stops you from frying network interface cards on a laptop, for sure. But they're not going to be able to power what they're trying to power with that switch. And that should be easily recognized by just kind of like looking up the model number of whatever camera or access point they're trying to power, seeing what kind of power it takes, and then looking at the spec sheet for the switch and making sure that it supports the same thing. Now, even if that switch did support 24 or 48 volt power over Ethernet, they would have to turn it on. That's a configuration. So a lot of the Unify range of switches support the 24 volt passive PoE because they were made to be used with those access points. But you do have to actually go into them and configure the ports that you need power on to make power, because the last thing you want is all ports just pooping out that power and frying anything you plug into it. So basically right here is they're kind of confusing different power over Ethernet standards.
Okay,
So you replugged it into the...
yeah.
Okay.
So let's hit it again.
Yeah.
And also, I forgot to mention, they did talk about the gateway being wrong because the camera did retain its old configuration for its old subnet.
But it's 6:30 on Sunday. Like, we can't be tearing things apart now and have things not be at least sort of functional when people come in the morning. So we just got to clean up and try to go to sleep tonight without just like having visions of IP addresses.
Okay, so they completely busted their timeline. So they came in on Saturday. Here it is at the end of the day on Sunday, and they're still not finished because it was a lot bigger of a job than they thought it would be. That happens sometimes. And Linus is definitely irritated about that. But I kind of want to go back to the whole segregation and security thing being a terrible idea. So I actually didn't catch whether or not they were setting up monitoring for the first time or if they had it before and needed to get it working again. but that's kind of another layer that I don't think I mentioned. So they have all these servers there. I'm not sure if any of them are public, but I would assume they probably have one or two that were public, which would definitely be a major security concern since it's all a flat network now. But on the other hand, their monitoring and all of their management traffic typically would be in its own VLAN, segregated from everything. So if it was all configured properly, like it probably was to begin with, if they had any public-facing servers or the services hosted on those servers, they would be in one VLAN able to be accessed from the outside, but all of the monitoring, like the hardware monitoring, the bandwidth monitoring, any type of management services such as the Unify controller or the NVR camera software, something like that, anything that controls the actual networking devices, that would also be segregated in its own VLAN. So that just kind of adds some more crap to this pile that they're creating by making it all one flat network, because now you have possible public traffic from the internet coming in to the flat network, as well as having all of the management running in there. So if anybody got access to anything in here, they could completely take over. But that's the end of these two videos. The next one I'm going to hit just real quick is them actually getting their 10 gig pipe installed.